In Singapore, we had like a 3-bedroom condo that we had.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have like a really lovely, like 3-4 bedroom house with a little private pool in a little sort of thing. And the cost of 1 month's rent in Singapore will get us this place in Jogja for about a year. So 1 month in Singapore rent is about a year's worth of rent in Jogja. The one line of advice that I'd give to anyone, and it doesn't really only necessarily apply to Indonesia, it kind of applies to anywhere you go, is that embrace the culture. Wherever you go, don't try and impose your culture on wherever you're trying to live. Try and get there, learn how they work, learn the local culture, and just embrace it. Any time you move internationally, it's an effort. You don't want to sort of do it every year, but we love to spend 3 to 5 years in a particular country because you really get sort of a feel for it. You learn the language, you learn the people, the cultures, you learn local cooking, just everything, and it feels like it becomes part of your identity a little bit.
In today's episode, we are diving into a story that's anything but ordinary. The guest is an Australian-born filmmaker, storyteller, and the host of the podcast No Ordinary Monday, podcast that seeks out the crazy stories from the most unusual jobs on earth. He has lived an adventurous life that's taken him around the world, from his roots in Scotland to projects across different continents, and now to his home base in Indonesia. Through his work, he's captured the power of stories that connect and captivate. And today, he's sharing his own expat journey. Today, on Expat Experts, Chris Barron. Let's start. Chris, welcome to the show. I'm very, very happy to have you here. Yeah, maybe as a first introduction, we should start from the beginning. Maybe you can explain us a little bit where you're from, what did your job was, because I know you've been a filmmaker, storyteller, now podcaster. What is the start of all this career? Let's say like this.
Well, thank you. I mean, first off, Mark, thank you very much for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here. But it's one of those things when people ask me, I meet someone for the first time, and they're like, "Oh, so where are you from?" I have to make a decision. Either am I going to get to know this person, or is it just like a short thing? I was like, because if I get to know them, I will tell them the full story. If I don't tell them, just a short thing, I'm like, "Hey, I'm Scottish," or whatever. That's my short answer. But the long answer, because I'm on your show, I thought, this is the right place to tell it all in full. So my father is Scottish, and my mother is Australian, and I was born in Australia. However, I was less than 2 years old when we moved to Dubai. And so I became an expat when I was 2 years old, essentially. To give you this sort of run through things, so from Dubai, a couple of years later, we moved to Houston, Texas. And I did all my elementary school in Houston, Texas. So my home videos are me running around with a Texan accent, which I've lost now, as you can probably tell. And then maybe when I was 6 or 7 years old, we moved to, when I was about 11 years old, when I moved back to Dubai to do my high school. So we moved again back to Dubai, and I did most of my high school in Dubai. And when I was about 15, I moved to Scotland and did a couple of years of boarding school and then started university in Scotland. And then I started my career in Scotland. Then I moved to England after that. And then I was in London for many years. I met my wife there, and we decided to move to Singapore. And so maybe I was in my, early 30s, mid 30s. And then very recently, about 2 years ago, my wife and I decided to move from Singapore, and now we live in Indonesia. And it's a small little town called Jogja, which is on the island of Java, sort of south of Jakarta. So it's a beautiful little place. But yeah, so that's my sort of long journey of being an expat so far.
Very quick summarized, I suppose. And yeah, maybe the first question that pops up, and if you might respond about it, it's just why so many moves, especially when you are a kid? I suppose it was more the reason of your parents moving than yours.
Yeah, so my dad, I think it kind of started when he's a geologist and worked in the energy business. So when he was 18, he left, school to go to university. He was in England, and then very quickly he wanted to leave the UK and moved to Australia to work there, and met my mother. And so, as you said, me and my brother, just as kids, we just bounced around wherever my parents were living. And I guess my first decision as an adult, in my sort of professional career, I was living and working in London for about 9-10 years, and was to move to Singapore and then Indonesia after that. So it was kind of, I guess, my wife is a Swiss German. So she's, not British. And both of us kind of shared a taste of, we love traveling. We love to live in different places. And we sort of both thought, no, I don't think we want to stay in the UK for long term. And so, yeah, we made a decision, found a place that worked for both of our careers, and Singapore ticked most of the boxes, and we made the move.
Cool. I mean, I envy you right now because it's just like one of the discussions that I had with my partner was like, okay, if we need to take a next move, where we go to, and one of the high rank ones was Singapore, definitely. But
Yeah.
yeah, you know what happened in 2020 and everything crashed down. COVID came exactly in that moment, and we said, yeah, not going to happen.
I tell you what, we moved to Singapore in, I think it was May 2019. And then we had 6 months, and then Singapore was one of those places where they're pretty strict when it comes to lockdown and everything. So yeah, we had 6 months of Singapore without COVID, and then after that it was just 2 years of COVID, and we all know what that's like.
Yeah, I think the living abroad while the COVID times is like a different story. I mean, it's just like everyone lives it differently, and it's interesting to talk about it because it's not really, I mean, especially those of us who moved during COVID or like at the beginning of COVID. And then suddenly you are theoretically to explore a new country and you're not doing anything of that because you're close at home. So, yeah.
I mean, yeah, we were locked down.
And what about professionally wise? Like you were already working in the whole filmmaking, like storytelling industry, like back in the UK when you did the move to Singapore. How does Singapore treat that also? You said it fits the life of it, but what's the check
Yeah,
marks that it checked?
I've been working as a documentary filmmaker for about 15 years or so. So I left university with a master's in molecular microbiology. So I was a scientist, and I found, I kind of did a first career in scientific sales and whatnot, and hated it. But long story short, I found myself in scientific documentaries, working for the BBC at the time in Glasgow. And I did a little bit of time in Glasgow, in the BBC there, and some of the independent companies, and then decided to move to London and build my career there. And again, I was at the BBC for a time, some independent companies for a while, and spent about 9 years building my career there. And I mean, London is an amazing, amazing, amazing place as a professional, especially when you're working in television. It's such a rich work environment. There's so much going on, really talented people, and it's all just really, really thriving. So it was for my wife and I, and my wife is in the sort of, I guess you call it pharma biotech kind of consulting space. So not television and media at all, very different kind of career. And we both had decent careers there, and we were kind of like, but, we have good careers, but we'd still love that draw to move was slightly larger than the safety of staying put. And so we looked around, and through contacts, a friend of a friend sort of said, oh, I've just done some work with a good production company in Singapore. You might want to speak to them, and put me in touch. And they said, oh, yeah, we're looking for a director. So if you want to come over, we can offer you a 2-year contract, and we'll sort out all your visa and all that kind of stuff. And my wife joined me on a spouse visa. And then once she was over, it's much easier to find a job. Once you're in a country, as I'm sure many of your listeners know, it's harder. So yeah.
Cool. What is the first impressions on arriving to Singapore? Because they are both very big cities now. You come from London, you arrive to Singapore. I think the metropolis style of life might be similar, but they are completely two different worlds for sure.
100%.
Like, how did it feel at that moment of time?
I mean, this is the thing. I think for me, I've traveled so much, and I've been very fortunate growing up as well. We went on holidays, and I've traveled. I mean, even for my work, as a documentary in the documentary space, we do a lot of traveling to weird and wonderful places. And so I had been through Singapore and visited, 3 or 4 times before we'd even considered living there. So I had a pretty good idea of the city, what it was like, what it could offer. But for my wife, she had never visited. So she actually moved to Singapore without having ever visited the country. So for me, it was okay. Like, it's always different when you enter a country not having a return ticket. So you're like, great, and now I've got to sort out housing, and I've got to get a bank account sorted, and this and all that kind of stuff. It was fine. You just sort of, I busied myself with work and just got on with finding friends and enjoying the city. And then my wife joined a few weeks later when she packed up London. And I think for her, it was an interesting experience to live in Southeast Asia for the first time. It's The climate is radically different to Europe.
Yeah.
The food, I mean, the food is amazing in Singapore. So that was a big offering as well. But it is, I mean, but ultimately, Singapore is a soft landing for many expats. You know, it's a very modern city. A lot of expats live there. It was a slightly larger shock when we moved from Singapore to Indonesia.
I was going to ask about that. Like, what made you choose it as a new home base? Like, why the move from Singapore to Indonesia?
Yeah, so we were in Singapore for about 5 years or so, and we love, I mean, as I said, Singapore is an amazing place. We had great friends there, you know, good social circle. We had hobbies and all that kind of stuff. But I'd say the one challenging thing maybe about, not challenging, but it is expensive. It is expensive, Singapore. For housing, just for a lot of different things. It could be an expensive place to live. And we both had the opportunity to start working remotely. So we didn't necessarily need to be, and again, this is one of the silver linings of COVID, is that remote working kind of element became a little bit more acceptable. So yeah, we found ourselves in this space where we could do that. And we wanted to keep our clients and our work contacts within the same time zone. So we started looking at the countries around Singapore that had favorable visa situations and, you know, good, all the, you know, we had a bunch of boxes we wanted to tick. So, you know, obviously a favorable visa, it's not just going to be a visa for 1 year and then you're done. We wanted a slightly longer term situation. We had a cat, you know, that we wanted to bring with us. So it wasn't like we would be able to leave quickly if we had to. So we wanted to make sure there was a stability. And obviously moving, I'm sure some of your listeners know that moving a pet around the world is not cheap. You don't want to keep doing that every year.
Nope.
I think moving our cat Ricky was almost twice as much as it was to move all of our belongings.
Yes, I also know that. And I've done it twice with 2 cats. So
yeah.
It is expensive, it's bureaucracy, it's vaccines, and it's not only the plane on the ticket, it's just a lot of like random stuff that you don't really know.
Yep. Paying $500 for the special crate or something like that, you know,
Yes.
and but of course we do it because they're, you know, part of our families and all that kind of stuff. We wouldn't move without them. But yeah, so we started looking around. We looked at Thailand initially because my parents had retired to Thailand, and they previously had a good visa, but they changed their visa policies recently, and it became more difficult. I mean, Indonesia wasn't actually our first choice. Our first choice was on the island of Borneo. There's a town called Kota Kinabalu in the state of Sabah, which is just beautiful. And we did a sort of long weekend there to test it out. And it's, you know, on the coastline, you know, you've just got like tropical waters with like whale sharks, you know, just swimming off the thing. It's just insane. And they had an amazing, I think a visa, I can't remember what it was, but you put a term deposit in and then you get 10-year visa or something like that.
Whoa.
And we're like, great, that sounds amazing. And we sort of spoke to some visa agents and they were like, yeah, it's all good. It's all good. The government hasn't reopened that visa yet because of COVID. They closed it, but we think they're going to do it soon. So we thought, okay, soon, you know, they thought maybe a few months. We thought that's fine. Long story short, it took a lot longer than they thought it would have to come back online. So we just said, we can't wait. So we looked for plan B, and we saw that Indonesia had some good visa options, but we just didn't want to move to Jakarta, you know, because it's a really, really big city, you know, very busy, very polluted in some aspects. And we didn't want to move to Bali because Bali's just, is a, you know, crazy place for tourists and can be expensive. And ultimately it was just swapping one island on Singapore for another island on Bali. And we wanted a bigger place to explore. And two friends of ours independently at a dinner party were like, have you ever heard of Jogja? And we were both like, never heard of this place in our lives. And so we started Googling the next day, and I think like in a couple of weeks we were on a plane to check it out, and it's got a brand new airport and had everything we sort of wanted and needed, and the cost of living was so favorable and just offered us kind of all the things that we wanted in terms of nature. You know, Singapore's amazing, but it is essentially just a big concrete jungle. And they have great parks and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, in terms of like, if you really want to get into the wild, yeah, it's not the wild. Yeah. So that's what led us to move here.
Cool. I wanted to ask you also, like, you kept doing your job. I mean, you also switched remote. I'm working remote from even before COVID. So I'm used to working from home, but how is doing documentary and filmmaking from home? How do you do that actually?
Well, the kind of films that I make, we have a team, you know, And sometimes the team is big, sometimes it's small. I've led teams which are like 25 people on a larger scale. Sometimes it's just like 4 or 5 of us. So, but I was able to do remote work. And because Singapore is so close, it's just a 2 hour flight. And if I needed to go back for meetings, I could just, hop on a flight on a Monday, spend the week there if I needed to, and come back. And so the projects that I was doing, if I needed to come in, it was quite easy for me to just pop over and do stuff. And so it wasn't really a big deal. And a lot of, see, when you're filming, it doesn't matter. You're out in the field anyway, you're flying to whichever country that you're filming in. Just the pre-production, which is essentially a lot of research, a lot of phone calls, a lot of meetings, which can all be done remotely now. And then during the post-production phase, I went over and spent, a week or two in the first instance just to sort of make sure that the editor, make sure we get everything right, we're on the same page. And then again, it's just so easy doing what we're doing now, speaking face to face. I will say that for me personally, it's like 70% as effective as being face to face. There's sort of that slight element of, especially when you have a larger team, I think it would be less possible because there's these little moments of spontaneity in the office where you're sitting there, you've just read an interesting article online or something, you turn to your colleagues, oh, how about this? And you get that real spontaneous kind of moments. But I think you've got to make some sacrifices in some ways for living a remote life.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe just a couple of questions more about before we jump to the next section. Like, you lived in quite some countries, you did quite some changes through that. Did you have any moment where you said, what the hell did just I do? Or where just like the challenges of settling in, the culture shock, everything was too much for you?
To be honest, not really. I've always, whenever I've considered a move in my adult life, I've always thought I can always go back, one step. I always have, just to give a preface, I'm very lucky I have 2 passports. I have an Australian passport and a British passport. So it's almost like having a bit of a safety net there that, I can always take these risks and go to somewhere like Indonesia, like Singapore. And always in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, if things really go badly, I can always, return home to those places. You always find a way to make things work, and I think I'm very analytical. I plan in advance a lot, and I try and think about all the things that could go wrong and ensure that, if I get to a place, I've already planned for potential things. There's always things you don't realize, but I think the short answer is no. I've never gotten to a place where I'm like, oh, I've made a big mistake, I need to go home right now.
Nice. I lied. Maybe I have one question more because you touched
Sure.
something that it sparks a little bit of a curiosity. What about identity crisis? Because at the end, you lived in so many places and you grow up in so many places, which makes it different from the perspective of someone who have an identity crisis because they absorbing cultural things as an adult, but you had that from a child perspective. How did you deal with that? Did it build on your personality and way you think?
It's a very good question, actually, Mark, because I've always said that, there's great advantages to growing up the way I did. I feel like I'm very adaptable. I can make friends with a lot of different people, a lot of different cultures. I'm very easy to empathize, with people, putting myself in people's shoes and be in a place without, as you say, that real like culture shock panic. I'm like, oh, this is just, how these particular people live in their culture. But the downside to that, I would say, is that I don't really have a feeling of where I call home. I don't really have a sense. If someone says, where's home? I'll just say, for ease, I'll say Scotland or the UK, or I'll say Australia, even though I've never technically lived in Australia. I have family in various places, and I guess they are home because that's where my family connections are. But no, if I ever said, this is my home, I'm so homesick for a place. Like, I don't have that connection to any one country, which, it kind of becomes very interesting, a patriotic feeling. A lot of people feel patriotic for their countries. And I don't necessarily have that same level of like patriotism, I have affection for Scotland, and I love Scotland as a place and culture, I guess culturally, and I probably feel closest to Scotland if I had to say anything. But still, it's not like home. I've had many homes in my time. And the other downside is that I don't have, I had friends when I was a kid, but a lot of people might have childhood friends that they know for their whole lives. I tend to have lost touch with a lot of these people over the years. And so my oldest friends might be from university, for example, or, from the most recent place I'm living. So I do lack that element which a lot of people might cherish in their lives.
I know about it also, like the disconnection from home. It's also something that comes up into the podcast multiple times, especially people who repatriate, who went back home, and everything evolved. You evolved, but the world turns around also in the place that you were living, and who used to be there, your friends suddenly have 3 kids and 4 cats, and you are not in the same moment, like, but also like the hobbies change, their way of doing stuff. I don't know, like everyone evolves, and this
Yeah.
is a curious recurrent topic here also. Maybe the last question before we jump to the fast reply questions: are you planning to stay to Indonesia for now? Are you calling it home? It's the last base, let's say, like this.
For now, like I say, any time you move internationally, it's an effort. You know, you don't want to sort of do it every year. Some people do, they travel light and all that kind of stuff, but we love to spend like, 3 to 5 years in a particular country because you really get to sort of a feel for it. You learn the language, you learn the people, the cultures, you learn local cooking, like just everything. And it feels like it becomes part of your identity a little bit. And not to say if you spend, less than a year here, you don't have that. But like, the longer you spend in a place, you just get a deeper connection to the place and its people. So for now, yes, I think we're staying as long as we can, but we don't have a plan for where we would go next particularly. My wife and I make very long-term plans, like, if we're retiring, where would we settle? And maybe it's Scotland. My wife is Swiss, but she loves Scotland as well. So could be there, or maybe Australia. Those two places keep coming up on our list. But yeah, for now, we're pretty happy here.
Cool. So yeah, right. I would say we jump directly to the fast reply round, if it's okay for you. The idea of this, it's, as you already know, like quick answers, the first thing that comes to your mind, like trying to keep a short version for those who might be interested. I would ask you to pick. I mean, you lived in a lot of countries, but maybe probably we should choose between Singapore and Indonesia. Depends on what you prefer to be responding.
I'll probably. I mean, I'm living in Indonesia now. That's my most recent move, and it's probably freshest in my mind. So let's go Indonesia.
Okay, so let's do Indonesia then. The first question that I have, it's about cultural adjustment. What took you a while to adapt in Indonesia, for example?
I mean, Indonesians are incredibly friendly. And to say the one thing is that I drive here, and if you come from a European country, learning the local driving culture is really interesting because you just have to adapt, and people might be aware of what it's like in Southeast Asia driving, and Indonesia is no different. There is a beauty in the chaos, I would say, and it works somehow, but you have to be willing to adapt to that because they're not going to adapt to you as the foreigner. You have to adapt to the local driving culture, and I've had a lot of fun doing it. And you see some interesting things on the road here, but it's fantastic.
Nice. What about social life? Like, how do you meet friends in Indonesia?
So in Jogja, one of the challenges is there's not a huge expat community here. There are a lot of retirees, a lot of Dutch people. So there's a small community, but there are not many people in our age group. There's a few, which we've met through Facebook groups. There's like a WhatsApp group here. So we met a few expats through that. But we've also got local friends. I go to a gym, I play soccer, football, met some people through that as well. So we've got both.
Nice. You touched it before. You said you tried to learn the language. You speak in Basha. What are you trying to? Any learning tips that you want to give?
I mean, English is not widely spoken in Jogja. It's Bahasa Indonesia, which in all intents and purposes of all the Southeast Asian language is probably the easiest one to learn and pick up. So we've been easily picked up, probably a couple hundred words of vocabulary easily that we can use every day. I think we should be learning more. We use Duolingo. At some point, we'd love to get a tutor in. But yeah, you can also get by the day-to-day stuff. Google Translate, it's so easy these days, just to sort of get some level of communication between, you and somebody.
Makes sense. You already touched that one also, but I mean, compared to Singapore, everything is cheap probably, but the cost of living of Indonesia right now, what it's like I don't know, what is surprisingly cheap, what is expensive, what's the cost of normal living per month?
I mean, we probably spend, in terms of US dollars, $1,500 to $2,000 a month for our expenses. That includes rent. We have a small hire car and our food and just activities. So that's kind of our average. I mean, to give your listeners a sort of the big surprising statistic that always gets us is that here, in Singapore, we had like a 3-bedroom condo that we had. And here we have like a really lovely, like 3-4 bedroom house with a little private pool in a little sort of thing. And the cost of 1 month's rent in Singapore will get us this place in Jogja for about a year. So 1 month in Singapore rent is about a year's worth of rent in Jogja, approximately. So that's the level. Yeah. And just everyday living. Food is super cheap. Fuel is super cheap. And so, yeah, it's good.
Nice. You talk about the home. So finding a home, how do you find apartments? What is the hardest part of the process?
Yeah, so that was my job when we first did our little recce trip. We had 6 months before we wanted to move here, and so I went around. And our first instance was like, oh, we're going to try and contact Airbnbs and see whether they want a long-term rental. And surprisingly, they all went, no, whatever our price is for like 1 month, you just pay the same price for 12 months. And we were like, okay, that's not a good deal. But so I just found various Facebook groups I was looking on for ages, and we got lucky and found this place and contacted the owner, and they were actually Balinese, so they spoke great English and they're really friendly. And so it's great to be able to communicate in our language with our landlords. And so, yeah, we found it. But a lot of people, we have a WhatsApp group with all the expats here and local people. They some say, hey, I'm looking for a 2-bedroom here, and people are helping out. And again, Facebook, WhatsApp groups, Telegram. There are like websites, but if you don't speak the local language, they're a lot harder to navigate.
Okay. So definitely community searching, let's say like this.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice. What about living like a local? What's the way of blending in, let's say like this, as an expat in Indonesia?
I mean, it's hard. Okay, first off, it is hard to blend in like in Indonesian when, you're, what we call a bule, walking around,
Yes.
sort of foreigner, a white person. But, one of the things I love here is, again, going back to the driving thing, is that they're, you pull up to an intersection and you've got all these guys who are unofficial. They just wear like a, high-vis vest, and they'll stop the traffic for you, And so basically the local culture is that you've got spare change, small denominations of notes. You just give these guys basically like 20 cents, 15 cents worth of currency. And they're kind of they're almost on every street corner, and they're stopping traffic to let people get on because it's crazy traffic. And so that was kind of for me like, great, so that's a great idea, helping these guys out and they're doing you a service.
So now you are doing the same, stopping traffic.
Oh no, I'm not doing that. I think it'd be like, not well accepted, but I definitely support them.
Nice. The next one, I don't know. I mean, it's a little bit difficult. It's work life. Probably you don't have it because you still work with the Singaporean and companies and so on. But maybe you have context that explain you a little bit how the work culture is in Indonesia right now.
Yeah, I don't think it's crazy like you look at a place like Japan or Singapore or Hong Kong where they work people to the bone. It's probably not that kind of high intensity environment. But I will say that the place that's worth noting about Jogja and probably Indonesia in general, that the wages are lower for sure than places like Singapore and Europe and things like that. So, yeah, well, I mean, especially in Jogja, it's kind of a bit of a, the working wages are very low compared to the rest of the country. So if you do come here looking for a local job, just be prepared for that.
Okay. You also said multiple times you drive, but what is the best way of getting around in Indonesia actually? Is it really driving or there is other means of transportation?
I mean, it depends on your risk appetite. The fastest way to get around is with a motorbike, or a scooter. And a lot of people have so many scooters on the road here. And a lot of expats will ride a scooter as well. And if you're comfortable riding a scooter and you're, as I said, kind of used to the local flow of things, that's probably the fast way to get around. We drive, because it's safer in a bigger sense. But if you're we live just outside the sort of main city. Within the city, they've got a pretty good bus system that you can get around. And if you need to go wider outside of Jogja to Jakarta, Java has a really good rail system, so you can take the train as well. They're quite nice as well, actually.
Yeah, you touched the going with motorbike and tourist, which is the typical end of ending in a healthcare hospital. So let's touch directly the next one, which would be healthcare. How does the system work? It's easy to access. Is it good quality?
So, touch wood, my wife and I haven't had to use the hospital system in like a real emergency kind of situation. So again, touching wood, crossing fingers and toes and whatever. But we have used it for minor stuff. So there are private hospitals here that are pretty good. So two big ones in Jogja. I guess one's is a Muslim hospital and one's a Christian hospital. Both are excellent that we use. And we also have international insurance. So we have Bupa insurance that kind of covers us for wherever we are. So we can use the local hospitals here. If we have some really serious issues, we can fly to Singapore or, places like Bangkok where you have, maybe a more robust system, or even Jakarta has a pretty good set of category 4, I think, hospitals as well.
Nice. Next one, it's also related with system. The bureaucracy, dealing with paperwork, you pass through visas, you said that you research how to do visas, how do you deal with permits, how is all that?
So we did all of our visa and permitting through a visa agent. So we paid them a fee and they basically took care of the entire bureaucracy for us. It is possible to do it on your own, again, but since it's not as accessible if you don't speak the language and you don't have the ins and outs, and we didn't want to take a risk and have it rejected or denied for, as we all know, sometimes we just forget a stamp or a piece of paper or whatever, and then your entire application gets rejected, and you don't understand why. So we went through a pretty well-respected agent, and they were brilliant, and they helped us with everything. You obviously have to pay for that service. It's part of it, but it comes with a lot of advantages as well, that, you're pretty much guaranteed to get your visa once you've sort of all up. You've kind of given them the details and paid your fees and whatnot. So it was fairly smooth, I would say. Little bits of, the only difference is that there isn't a huge visa company base in Jogja itself. We went through a Bali agent and they had to sort of like work out how to help us with a different place. And if we went to Jakarta or Bali, it'd be super easy, but Jogja was one step of extra sort of administrative work. But in the end, it was fine. We got there in the end.
Nice. The next one, it's the best and worst. What is the best thing of living in Indonesia? What is the worst thing of living in Indonesia?
For us, the best thing about living here is the reason that we came is, we have access to so much natural beauty and wonder. Within an hour's drive, we can drive up to an active volcano and go hiking. We can go exploring rice paddies in the west side of the town. There's like river caves that we can go tramping through for on the other side of town. And then a couple hours south is like the coastline with rugged, beaches and all that. So we're just spoiled for, natural beauty and wonder. And you just go for a hike and you're seeing, wildlife and all these things. Just, it's a cliche, but, nature therapy, you could just go for a walk in vast wilderness and it is so good for you and for your soul and however you want to talk it. But I think for us, that was the main reason that we came here. And it hasn't disappointed.
What about the worst?
Yeah, the worst. Again, I would love it if there was a larger expat community here, just having, that level of, a few other people from, they're on the same age group and same interests and stuff. Again, not an issue. We got loads of local friends and stuff. And I play soccer and football with these guys and they're great fun. But it would be cool to have like a large community here. But, you can't have everything. You got to sacrifice in some areas. Yeah.
The last one that I have, it's the top tip. If someone is willing to move to Indonesia, what is your one-line advice that you would give them?
The one line of advice that I'd give to anyone, and it doesn't really only necessarily apply to Indonesia, it kind of applies to anywhere you go, is that embrace the culture. Wherever you go, don't try and impose your culture on wherever you're trying to live. Try and get there, learn how they work, learn the local culture, and just embrace it. Kind of bring it into your own world, because it's a great way to live. You learn new things about yourself, about a new culture, new people, new language, and it's exciting. And I think there are aspects of your own culture which you can see that fit, within the local stuff. So we eat local food all the time, but we've also found a few little like delis which serve like foreigner stuff. So every once in a while, we'll go and get like, some home comforts. You know, my wife loves baking. She'll get like poppy seeds and stuff and make like a nice sort of, because she's also half Hungarian. She'll make like a Hungarian poppy seed cake and that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, I think just generally just go with the flow. Don't try and flow against it, you know, because everywhere has their own way of doing things. And yeah, you just have to embrace it.
Lovely. Yeah, I would say we jump to the mini game now. A little bit of fun surprise, let's say like this. The one that I prepared for you today, no, should be very easy. I will mention just some habits. It's a little bit of this and that, like let's say around the world, taking the advantage that you lived in quite some places, so you know quite some cultures and you traveled a lot. So my proposal is that I mention a few habits or customs, and you tell me if it feels more Indonesian or more Singaporean or more Scottish or more whatever. Of course, if you have a very strong reason why, you can also explain why the reason. The first one that I have, it's being punctual.
Being punctual, it's got to be Singaporean, 100%. That place runs like clockwork. Buses are on time, you know, things just work, very efficient. Yeah, 100% Singapore.
Talking about the weather.
Oh, it's got to be Scotland. The thing about Scotland is that it rains the majority of the time. It can be miserable, but yeah, that's a definitely a very Scottish thing to do, is talking about the weather.
It's not only talking, it's criticizing the weather, probably, no?
Yeah, no one's happy with it. But yeah, when it gets one beam of sunshine, everyone's got their shirts off and running around like it's summertime.
Eating spicy food for breakfast.
Spicy food for breakfast, probably. That could be Indonesia or Singapore, but I'm going to go Indonesia, you know. They have great food here. But yeah, you can kind of eat, you know, spicy sambal for your breakfast, and it kind of normal.
Nice. Queuing politely.
Again, Singapore. It's a very Singaporean thing, is everyone follows the rules, you know. And Singapore's a very rule-orientated place, and yeah, so definitely Singapore.
Nice. Removing your shoes before entering someone's house.
I'm going to go with Singapore again. You know, that's something we learned when we were there and sort of adapted to ourselves. So our home here, we do the same thing. We don't wear shoes inside, or we don't bring outdoor shoes into the house. So it's an Indonesian thing and a Singaporean thing, but I'll give it to Singapore.
Saying sorry even when it's not your fault.
I'm going to go England. That's a very English thing to do. You know, in London, you know, people are apologizing. You know, even if you bump into someone on the street and it was clearly someone else's fault, you'll end up apologizing just because it's just the thing to do.
It's the polite way.
Yeah.
Talking openly about money.
That's a thinker. I'm gonna say the UK probably is people pretty open, you know, in the workspace. But yeah, I mean, it's not generally people. It's something generally people do. You know, saying. I mean, are you saying how much they earn, or just how much they have in their bank account, or just generally?
Yeah, I mean, generally, yeah.
I mean, I will say the one thing that in Singapore that some people like to do is flaunt their money, you know? So it's maybe not talking about it, but like some people tend to go for a cheaper house, but then they'll have like a Ferrari sitting in their sort of like multi-story garage that they'll drive around in. And so it's sort of the openly showing the wealth. Yeah, openly showing the wealth, yeah.
Taking on a spontaneous weekend trips.
Yeah, I think that's probably that'd be a British thing to do, to go out, you know, to sort of either hop to France for the weekend, or, you know, I went rock climbing, you know, on the weekends sometimes, you know, saying, hey, on a Thursday, you're like, hey, who wants to come out? It's good weather. Again, going back to the weather. Oh, it's good weather this weekend. Shall we go for a barbecue or go climbing somewhere and just, jump in the car and do it?
Nice. Being spontaneous, or take life a little bit more as it comes, let's say like this.
Yeah, I mean, the Indonesians are very laid back, you know. I would say that definitely it's one of their great traits is that, you know, a lot of people we meet, they just take things as they come, you know. Some people may not have all the money in the world, but they overcome a lot of issues and just everyone seems very content here, even though it can be chaos at some time.
Being indirect to avoid conflict.
Yeah, that's definitely England, I think. Although, also Singapore. You know, Singapore, there's a sort of, you know, don't rock the boat kind of aspect to it as well. You know, especially if it's to authority.
Okay.
So yeah, maybe I'll give it between England and Singapore.
2 more. The doing small talk with strangers. Sounds American, but
No. Well, it's true. Like America hasn't really come into any of these actually, but I would say that it could be America. They're very open, but also Scotland. Scotland. I'm going to give it to Scotland because Scotland has, and especially a place like Glasgow where I lived. I would describe Glaswegians as aggressively friendly.
okay.
It's they're in your face. They're happy to see you. They want to talk to you. Yeah, so 100%. A Scottish person will just strike up a conversation in the middle of the street.
Brilliant. The last one that I have, it's respecting silence or pauses in conversations.
Respecting silence or pauses in conversations. You mean without filling them with some sort of like chat and like inane stuff? Depends where you are, but I would say England. England, Scotland can be good conversationalists, good emotional intelligence. If I couldn't say America. Unfortunately, I think Americans love talking. So
filling up.
yeah, they love to chat.
Cool. Yeah, I love these ones because sometimes it's just like give information about the culture in a less formal way. So thanks a lot for the response.
Yeah, no worries.
So I would say just before we wrap up the episode, I would love to hear a little bit of what you're working on right now. I know you have a podcast. We haven't talked about this, but clearly you are well equipped. So you have good cameras, good microphones, good headset. Yeah, maybe you can share a little bit about No Ordinary Monday, a little bit more about your podcast or any other project that you want to talk about, and also where listeners can find you and where they can contact with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, to give you the story of No Ordinary Monday and how it kind of came to be, I've been making documentaries for about 15 years. And what I found is through the filming and meeting all the different, I'd go to NASA and film with like Mars scientists, and I'd go and do like abseil into volcanoes and like meet the safety crew. And all of these people have such interesting stories about their jobs. And so in the last year or so, I thought, this actually could be a fascinating podcast. And so Ordinary Mondays, essentially, I get a guest on who has an extraordinary career story, so I've had people that have worked in like F1. I've had firefighters. I've had people that have been on the scene at like airplane crashes. And just like, and the way that the episodes work is, I get a little bit of like context about what their job is, how it works. And then basically the chunk of the episode is like a feature story. It's like every guest brings the most extraordinary experience of their entire career, and they relive it on the podcast for us. And for some, it could be, a pilot who ditched her airplane in the middle of the Pacific and was picked up by a Russian vessel. Or, I had a cave scientist who almost died in a Chinese cave when it started raining and the cave flooded up. So a lot of fascinating stories, and it kind of feeds into my documentary storytelling sense. Each episode kind of feels like it has a documentary storytelling element to it, even though I'm kind of sitting like this and talking with guests as they relive these things. So it's really been fun. We're only about 3 months old, but we release an episode every Monday, every week, and trying to up the ante every time with more and more exciting guests. So yeah, people can find us anywhere they find podcasts. Just type in No Ordinary Monday. And we're also on YouTube. I'm making an effort to edit videos on YouTube. It's a bit more time, but again, as they feel like documentaries, and a lot of my guests either have a lot of video material or photos or behind the scenes stuff, and I try and weave those into the in the episodes as well. And yeah, just come and find us, have a listen.
Cool. I mean, as always, for all the listeners, the links will be in the description of the episode, so you will if you don't find it, go to the description and then check it out. Yeah, I mean, I already told you I love the idea of the podcast, and I'm a little bit envious that it didn't come up to my mind first. At the same time, I'm curious because I suppose you have kind of a background of guests that when I thought about it, like, oh, I would love to do something like this, but who the hell I interview? That's also the problem. So I wanted to ask you, like, how do you find your guests? How do you find these amazing people?
Well, I mean, I again, like before I started this, I was brand new to podcasting. I had no idea what I was doing. I'm very experienced in filmmaking and documentaries and stuff, and some of those skills are translatable. But starting a podcast, I'm like, great. The first thing I'm going to do is going to try and record like 10 episodes before I even launch anything, just to make sure the format's good. And what I did was, I'm very fortunate that, as you said, I have a very good network of like, people that I know that are within either people I've interviewed before or behind the scenes folks. I kind of contacted all my lowest hanging fruit, as it were, and said, hey, I've got this idea. Do you want to sit down with me for an hour and have a chat? And a lot of people were like, yeah, sounds great. So that's how I got started. And, then I launched with, I think it was 3 or 4 episodes. And then from there, I've got the website, and people can, when I approach guests now, I've got now enough people that are like, oh, I kind of, you've interviewed that person and that sounds cool. I'm definitely, and it's interesting how people react. They kind of, especially people that I know have a good story. I interviewed a death researcher, and she's like, I don't have like a crazy story, but I was like, yeah, but you have an amazing career. And once we started talking, her story was like,
story.
Yeah, she had an amazing story. So it always comes out. So I'm very fortunate that now I can basically, I use a lot of different means for finding people, just Googling, if I'm looking for like a saturation or a technical diver, I would look on different websites and find people that maybe done TED Talks or things that are appeared in the media or podcasts before. ChatGPT is an amazing research assistant as well for finding people, and so, yeah, as long as I can think of a cool job, I'm thinking like professional dominatrixes, I've got, hopefully coming up at some point, and just trying to find anyone that comes to my mind and just reach out to them, say, hey, here's what we're doing. And if you're interested, love to have a chat. And a lot of times people are like, oh, that sounds interesting. And the great thing I've learned when I'm doing all my documentary stuff is that if you're talking to someone about themselves, it's not a hard sell. It's like, hey, come and talk to me about yourself for an hour and how cool you are.
The conversation goes also easier. I mean, that's exactly the whole aim of this podcast. Like, you're talking about your life as a guest, and at the end, you don't need to be inventing anything. You don't need to be creative. You just need to think a little bit of what has been your journey. And that should come more or less natural to majority of the people, let's say like this. Chris, it has been amazing hearing your journeys, and thanks a lot for explaining your whole story, but also like the insights that you gave on Indonesia and Singapore. I think it's very valuable for those who are thinking about it, for those who can still think about it. I'm looking from my own experience. I would love to, but yeah.
Well, I'll say, if anyone, I know how challenging some of these moves can be and how information's hard to come by. And if anyone has any particular questions or any specific things they want to find out about my story, they can reach out either on my socials. We have no Ordinary Monday on Facebook and all that kind of stuff, or you can reach out at hello, HELLO, at noordinarymonday.com if you got any questions.
Cool. That's the perfect way to end, I would say. Chris, thanks a lot. Pleasure having you in Expat Experts. And to all the listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow Expat Experts, but also No Ordinary Monday in your favorite platforms. Subscribe on YouTube and all the social media. Until the next time, keep exploring and stay curious, and see you in the next episode of Expat Experts.